more of a Tuesday edition of Southern Fried Sports right here on Tide 102.9 and 100.9 FM. Travis Reier, senior analyst for BamaOnline.com, with you weekday mornings from 11 a.m. until noon. And with that, we head back to the Peterbrook Chocolatier studio line and welcome on Cecil Hurt of the Tuscaloosa News and TideSports.com. Cecil, today's playlist theme of the day: songs that are better live than they are recorded, and I know that one ranks near the top of maybe your list.
It does. It does. There are several. You know, some of it depends on what live albums got released, and then you just have bands who've always been more of a live act than a vinyl act or a tape act or however it's recorded act. The Grateful Dead would be an example of that. You know, you don't. People remember the Grateful Dead for Grateful Dead shows, not for what was on the necessarily what was on the records.
I would think.
I'd say Dave Matthews Band would be the same.
Mm-hmm. Widespread Panic.
Sure, yeah.
Jam bands in general. I would almost say that anything by the Grateful Dead is better live than it is recorded. Yeah. Although, I mean, friend of the Devil.
Working Man's Dead is a nice
album. Yeah.
Kind of a country feel to it.
I think I like the faster version of Friend of the Devil, the recorded version, than the live version, though, Cecil, the slower one that Jerry always did.
Yeah, again, when you're talking about, you know, you go down that rabbit hole of live Dead performances, and there's so many of them.
Mm-hmm.
One of the classics, if you're a Deadhead tape collector, back in the old days, they'd swap tapes and so forth, was Tuscaloosa. So in 1977. So, you know, that's one of the high points of the band. The band, according to its most devoted followers, had high points and low points. But that lineup and those shows are highly regarded.
Talking about lineups, professional wrestling, it seems like that roster of alumni, unfortunately, there's kind of a definitive shelf life if you've been in that business for any length of time. And most recently, we've learned of the passing of King Kong Bundy, who I believe was billed at a quote-unquote playing weight of 458 pounds, Cecil.
Mm-hmm.
Where did he kind of rank in terms of superstars of the squared circle?
I thought in the 80s, I thought Bundy was right up there. He fit that Vince McMahon WWF at the time mold of likes the big guys. When we were in New York in 1986 for a kickoff classic, Alabama played up there. And we were in New Jersey. I couldn't get over to the Garden, but big tag team main event at that time, the angle they had going that time was Stud and Bundy were a tag team. Lou Albano managed them a good bit. And they would wrestle what were called who knows how this tie-in came in, but they called them the Machines from Japan. But it would be two various baby faces, either Bill Eadie, who was, you know, Axe and Demolition, but he was a machine, Blackjack Mulligan. But then they'd bring in Andre. You know, Andre's health, even by 1986, you know, Andre's health. And they were supposed to be masked, and the heels couldn't tell who they were, you know, and they Andre had been, you know, according to the storyline, Andre had been suspended for something, and he came back wearing a little mask, like you couldn't tell it was Andre, you know. Who else looks like that? Just from the body type, you know, you could wear a complete head cowl and you'd still know it was Andre. But that was a big main event at Madison Square Garden. I remember being disappointed I couldn't go over and see Stud and Bundy against the Machines, and then they'd use Hulk machines sometimes. You know, if they were really trying to put the card over, they'd have Hogan involved in it. And it was a way to get Andre in some six-man where he wasn't having to do very much because his health had started to decline. But Stud was the big rival for Andre for a long time, but Bundy too. And Bundy was a great on the mic, an entertaining guy. So went on and did some acting and some comedy, and his podcast when he talks about those days in wrestling are good and controversial. He'll say what he thinks or would. And I'm sure he just, he always was probably around that 400-pound, 450 mark, and I'm sure that didn't help his health in his last years. But no, he was an early precursor of, as a young guy, like a lot of them are. He was pretty decent athletically. I mean, he was big, but he could move around a little bit, but was just had that look, that heel look. So I thought Bundy was right in there in the echelon of superstar.
86, Cecil. That was sort of Cindy Lauper era, Captain Lou Albano, I guess.
It was. It was. Lou's health was starting to go a little bit too, for different reasons than Andre. But it was that rock and wrestling stuff and all that. But Bundy and Stud, they were really good heels. Really good heels.
Let's talk some Alabama and Auburn basketball tonight at Coleman Coliseum, 8 p.m.-ish tip-off, game set to air on ESPNU. Cecil, we know how critical this week is for Alabama in terms of at-large bid hopes for the NCAA tournament. But what about in terms of the Avery Johnson era at Alabama? Junctures in his near 4 seasons now, critical points in his time at UA. Where do you put this week on that sort of list, if you had one?
Well, it always helps your perception with the fans if you can beat Auburn, or it hurts it if you get swept by Auburn. That's not, because even casual fans, that registers somewhere. You don't have to be a Alabama basketball fanatic, although there are a lot of those. But even casual fans just don't want to hear, they lost to Auburn both times. I think it helped Avery last year to get those 2 wins over Auburn to win the season series. Certainly the way they beat them in the SEC tournament helped him a lot. So it helped. Whether it's decisive in terms of any decisions being made, I don't think that's the case. But you help yourself. You help yourself with your fans. You have an easier time when you go out and recruit. So it's important. There's no question about that.
In terms of losses for this team, and there have been more than a couple to judge in the last, I guess, 3 or 4 weeks. How did you kind of view the LSU game Saturday? From an effort, energy standpoint, did you see it as improved, even though it wasn't a game in which Alabama won? And also wanted to get your thoughts on just LSU's physicality on that roster. And not just guys that have been around. We're talking about, freshmen, Cecil, that are ready to go.
Yeah, and big bodied, and some of them are guys you don't talk about that much. Like Hayes hit a big 3-pointer. You never hear him mentioned much. Emmett Williams, he come in there and be physical and push people around. And then Naz Reid, clearly is one of the top freshmen in the league. You could make an argument that he's the top freshman. He certainly gives you that inside presence. They've put together a heck of a roster.
Looking at the game tonight, Cecil, Alabama, according to Vegas, a bigger underdog to Auburn than it was Saturday to LSU. Is this, it kind of surprises me. I think Alabama actually matches up better with Auburn tonight than it did LSU, but this may be Vegas's way of trying to get the Alabama money to come in. It may be struggling with that a little bit.
I think that they put Alabama out as a home dog the last time and probably got a pretty good return on that, and so they look to keep that going. They certainly study what they think. but it's not exactly a predict. Las Vegas is not exactly a prediction of an outcome, and so they're also interested in what will attract money. They're ultimately interested in what will attract money. So Alabama's not been a great home pick this year, and so they're catching a couple of points, 2.5. So one other thing I will say against LSU, I think the effort, in terms of getting out there and trying was okay, but I think there was an opportunity there that I didn't think LSU played great, certainly not in the first half. So you had 3 guys, and you're down to an 8-man rotation, and you've got 3 guys who arguably had their worst offensive game of the year, or certainly of the conference. Dejan, who I'm sure the quad bruise bothered him. He looked like it bothered him. He didn't look fast out there. It looked like it was a distraction for him. Tevin Mack and Kyra, they all had their worst offensive game. It's not blaming them. It's just that's a tough opponent to have to overcome, getting far less production than you'd expect in an average game. I mean, they were below average in terms of production. So you're really only relying on 3 guys offensively, and it's hard to beat an LSU with that. You might beat they're really not a team in the SEC that maybe with the exception of Vanderbilt, that you can beat without playing pretty well. And to be really relying on 3 guys, more or less offensively, maybe 4, but basically it's Petty and Hall and Riley Norris. That's a tough task to say. We're going to go out and beat LSU with 3 guys not even playing their average offensive game.
Cecil, kind of shifting gears a little bit, still keeping with basketball. I watched the Mississippi State and South Carolina women play for essentially the SEC regular season title on Sunday over in Columbia. And you got to give Dawn Staley and obviously Vic Schaefer a lot of credit for how they've transformed those programs, who really didn't have much history at all in women's basketball 7 or 8 years ago, into not only national championship contenders, but in the case of South Carolina, a national champion a couple of years ago. As it relates to Alabama, you think women's basketball at UA matters? And if it doesn't really matter, do you think it should?
Well, it should. If you compete in something, you should try and win. At Alabama, you've got enough resources department-wide to be good at everything. Now, it's not going to work out every year where you're really good at every sport every year. The Jeremy Foley model. Florida has some advantages in that Alabama didn't. But Florida's not great at basketball either, frankly.
No, they're bad this year.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's an interesting argument about where the allocation of resources is and what you do. At some point, it's been a long time. How long has it been since Alabama was in the NCAA tournament?
Oh, you got to go back to Rick Moody, right?
Yeah. Has it been that? Has it been since 2001?
I believe so.
It's been a long time. And that's a reasonable expectation. Sometimes, you just can't go 15 years without making the NCAA tournament. So they've got to look at that's different. That's a different bar than winning the conference and dominating the conference. That's tough. I mean, that's tough to do. You want to do that, and maybe if you make the NCAA tournament, then you build on that and get to where you can compete for the conference championship. But it's interesting. There's going to be some. I don't know what the situation at Alabama will be. I haven't been to enough of their games to give a fair evaluation of how they're playing or what. I know some injuries hurt them this year. There's going to be, you have to assume there's going to be changes at Tennessee, and that they're not going to stay where they are forever. And obviously, as you mentioned, two teams that have sort of filled in for them, but it's not the league it was. And again, all credit to those two teams that you named, Mississippi State and South Carolina. But, it used to be Vanderbilt was good, and Kentucky was really good, and Georgia was really good, and Auburn was really good, and Alabama was really good. And it's not quite that kind of league right now. So, and I think a lot of it has to do with where do you allocate your resources, how much do you spend on it versus your other women's programs. And so that's the kind of thing that you have to sit down and look at the end of the year. Although, again, ultimately, without saying dominate the conference, making the NCAA tournament got to be a goal that you reach in a reasonable amount of time.
There you go, Cecil Hurt of the Tuscaloosa News and Tidesports.com. As always, Cecil, we appreciate the time here on Southern Fried Sports.
Sure.